What's going on, guys? My name is Jordan. I'm the head coach here at SaberSim, and I wanted to record this video walking through my NASCAR DFS process, how I use SaberSim's powerful NASCAR sims and lineup building tools to build my lineups each and every week. Now, strategically speaking, I think NASCAR actually has a lot in common with a sport like NFL Showdown, where to take down large field GPPs, you're going to need the optimal lineup or very close to the optimal lineup to win. And a lot of what I'm doing in my process is allowing SaberSim sims to handle identifying and constructing those optimal lineups and adding my value in diversification to make sure I'm playing a well-diversified portfolio of lineups and avoiding duplication. Because you're playing with typically a pretty small driver pool, and a lot of these contests, especially for the Daytona 500, can get pretty large, duplication becomes a problem. We don't want, when we finally identify that optimal and have a high-scoring lineup, for it to be shared with 1,000 other people. So I like to spend some time here trying to figure out how to avoid duplication. So let's go ahead and actually dive right into what my process looks like in the app. So as I mentioned before, because our sims are powered by this robust model that's taking into account individual driver skill, the Vegas odds for a particular week, the intricacies of that week's track and race as a whole, I'm not spending a lot of time doing a lot of research here into these individual drivers and adjusting projections. My process starts with a ownership rule intended to avoid duplication. And for that, I'm going to set a rule limiting how high the geometric mean of the lineup ownership can get. Now, I'm going to link a video in the description of this one that goes deeper into the math behind a geometric mean, but for the purposes of this video here, it's really just a useful equation and tool that you can use to avoid lineups from being very highly duplicated here. And the equation is, it is the total number of expected dupes that you're getting in a lineup, or in this case, the desired dupes, divided by the number of entries that are actually in the contest, or the number of lineups that are in the contest, to the power of 1 divided by the number of players in a lineup. So for DraftKings NASCAR, that would be 6 here. So filling out this equation here, I'm going to use 10 as my number of expected dupes, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Divided by 107,000, which is the number of lineups that are in tomorrow's Millie Maker for the Daytona 500, to the power of 1 over 6, again, because there's 6 drivers in a lineup on DraftKings. In terms of why I'm using 10 instead of a number like 1 here, I don't typically want to get super restrictive with this rule. I still want to allow SaberSim to build high upside lineups that have a high probability of being optimal. And when you restrict your lineups for 1 expected dupe or even less, when you're really trying to just say force a unique lineup, it really starts to get very restrictive on the lineups that SaberSim can build, and it actually may even prevent you from building very many lineups in your pool at all. The main purpose of this rule for me is to avoid having lineups that are expected to be extremely highly duped, like 100 dupes, 500 dupes, even 1,000 dupes in the contest. And so I'm going to use a number like 10 here as a base point for this rule. So in terms of actually setting this rule up in the app, I'm going to go over to the lineup rules section on the right here, and I'm going to add a new rule. And this is going to be an aggregate rule. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say my ownership geometric mean is no more than, and then I need to calculate this out here. So I have Google Calculator pulled up here, and I'll enter this again. I had already done it here ahead of time, but we'll do this again here. So it is 10 divided by 107,000. And then I'm going to take this number to the power of 1 divided by 6. And this is ultimately the cap of the geometric mean that I want to use in my lineups. One thing to note is that on SaberSim, you always want to represent this as the actual, I guess not a whole number, but you don't want to represent this as the decimal format. You're essentially representing this as a percentage here. So in this case, I'm going to put 21.3 here in as my geometric mean. And what this is going to do in the app is it's going to build lineups that each lineup has an expected dupe here of no more than 10. So any lineup in the pool, I'm going to, based on this particular equation, I'm going to assume that these lineups are max going to be duped up to 10 times. So we're going to save that rule here, and now I'm going to go ahead and get my build started. When it comes to the actual build settings themselves, you'll see that basically all of the default settings for virtually all contests for NASCAR are 0, 0, 10. And what this is doing is this is going into our sims for each lineup that you're building here and building a single race optimal for that particular sim. We're taking a single sim out of our thousands of sims here and building the optimal lineup, which is literally what we are trying to do when it comes to taking down these contests. We want the optimal lineup for the way this particular race could play out. So I don't typically make a lot of adjustments when it comes to the build settings. All I'm going to do here is I have 20 lineups in the Millie Maker for tomorrow, so we'll go ahead and set the settings to that particular contest, and I'm going to just set this equal to 20, and now I'm going to go ahead and let this start building here. Once I'm in a build here, the main things I'm focusing on are diversification. Now, the main tool I like to use that is the min uniques players up here, which is going to control how many players in your lineup must be different from one another when comparing any given lineup to the other lineups in your set. So by default, this is set at 1, but I like to get pretty aggressive with min uniques when it comes to NASCAR. And the main reason why is that there is a wide variety of lineups that can be optimal and a wide different variety of constructions that can be optimal for different races here. And you can actually see that in action as you increase min uniques here. So I'm going to increase this to 2 here, and we'll see if that even has any change on my lineups. And it does not. My top 20 lineups out of my pool of 500 here already had at least 2 drivers different from each other across the entire set. But as we increase this, you'll see that last lineup in the pool reaches a little bit further and further into my pool. And you can actually see here why I think diversification is so important in NASCAR. Even forcing 4 unique drivers across each lineup out of my set of 20 here only gets to lineup 215 out of my pool of 500. I like to be pretty aggressive with my min uniques. I would say that in a sport like NASCAR, where it's very easy for a driver's engine to go or for them to get in a wreck and just be wiped out of the race completely, I want to make sure that I'm playing a very diversified pool of lineups. So I will typically increase min uniques as a general heuristic of what I like to use. I will increase it to 1 less than the maximum amount of min uniques I can get in my set. So if we increase this to something like 5, we will see that our lineups has dropped down to 10, which means there's only 10 lineups in the pool that are basically 100% unique from each other in this case. So I might use something like 4 for my min uniques. This is also going to depend a lot on how many lineups you're playing. For this particular example, I'm playing 20 lineups in a Millie Maker tomorrow, so something like 4 might actually be pretty viable here. If I was playing 150, it's much less likely that I'm going to be able to get 4 min uniques across an entire set of 150. Yeah, you can see. So for 150, there's only 43 lineups in my pool of 500 that have 4 min unique players from one another. So I would probably drop this down to maybe 3. Probably, actually, I would play 2 min unique drivers in this particular case, which is 1 less than the maximum that's available for this pool of 500. So I'm setting that equal to 2. The other thing that I'll do is I'll take a look and see that after I've arrived at my min uniques that I like here, let's switch this back to my 20 lineup build. I'll go through and check on my leverage here, my highest and lowest leverage to different drivers in the field. And I just want to make sure that there aren't any extreme outliers here, especially for very low projected, very low salary drivers here that are showing up. The main thing that I'm doing here is protecting against the ownership rule that I set on the home screen. Sometimes if you use a really restrictive rule, like say you try to set that ownership product rule to only have 1 expected dupe per lineup, you might see that some of these drivers here with a very low ownership projection start showing up in a ton of your lineups. And that's really SaberSim saying, hey, the only way that we can build lineups that are expected to have 1 dupe or expected to be unique is to give you 90% of, 4% owned BJ McLeod, right? Which is probably something that I don't really want to do. So after I've set my diversification with my min uniques, a lot of times I like to go through and just, again, make sure that there aren't any extreme outliers with my leverage on these different drivers where I am way overexposed in the field on a particular driver. Now, for the SaberSim Pro subscribers out there, since you have the ability with Pro to build up to 5,000 lineups in a pool and create advanced custom metrics that you can then filter on post-build, I would tweak this process just a bit if you have Pro. First thing I would do is that instead of handling duplication up front with a lineup rule, I would use this as a filter post-build. And the main reason why is with 5,000 lineups in your pool, you can typically just chop off lineups that don't meet your duplication threshold and still have plenty of lineups to work with. and you have the custom metrics to be able to create filters for things like geometric mean ownership post-build. So I'm going to turn that rule off there, and I'm going to run another build here, this time on the exact same settings, but this time I'm going to use a pool size of 5,000. So we'll go ahead and kick this build off. I'm going to give this just a moment to run, and I'll show you how I'd go about setting up that filter in this case to avoid duplication. Now that we've got our 5,000 lineup build here, all we need is a metric to calculate the geometric ownership of each lineup and a filter to filter out lineups that we don't want to play. So first things first, we'll go ahead and just add that metric here. I've actually already got one put in, but we'll delete that so I can just show this process from scratch. So we'll go ahead and add a new metric. I'll give this a name of GeoMean Own so it's clear to us here. And we can add this in as my ownership geometric mean, and in this case we want the actual value of that here. So we'll save that metric here, and that will pop that up on the lineup card so we can see how highly these lineups are likely to be owned. And you can see actually as a difference from that first build we ran here, this lineup would be expected to have more than 10 dupes in the contest because that geometric ownership is 25.3 here. So now that we have that metric in place, we can just use a filter here. So we'll add a filter, and we're going to say show lineups that have the geometric mean own, which is the custom metric we added, that is less than 21.7. We'll go ahead and save this here, and we can see the effect that that has on this build. So this is taking 5,000 race optimals here and filtering out 984 of them that are expected to be duped more than 10 times in this particular contest. When it comes to the SaberSim Pro plan here, because you're working from lineups that are already optimals for single sim outcomes, I actually am willing to get a little bit more aggressive with the way that I set this filter because I have so many lineups to work with here. So I might go back here and at least explore what would it look like if I filtered out lineups that were expected to be duplicated at all in this build, and maybe try something like a ownership filter of, let's see, so we'll use 1 divided by 107,000 to the 1/6 power, so that's 14.5. So let's go back to our build here now and just see. Sometimes you have to just see what the impact of this is on your build here. So in this case, dropping the ownership to 14.5, which is basically filtering out all lineups except for those that we expect to be unique, filters out the vast majority of our pool. What this is now doing, as you'll see here, is this is going to start pushing those lineups to the top. That 75% BJ McLeod, 35% Cody Ware, just some of these just not very good drivers, low salary guys here, where you're really just counting on them to have a high upside outcome for this unique lineup. When you're eliminating more than, I would say, half or so of your pool, to me that's a sign that you're probably being too aggressive with the rule. So I might go back now here and see what happens if I do 5 or less dupes, and we'll try this here. So that's 18.9 instead. We'll just say 19 there and see the impact that that has on our build here. And that might be a little bit more of a healthy medium where we're eliminating maybe the top half or so, the most likely to be duplicated lineups in our pool, still leaving us with a big pool from which to work from. So in this case, then I would go back in and experiment with adjusting the min uniques up and seeing the impact that that has on my lineups and see how far down into my pool I'm going. So let's take a quick look. So this does reach pretty far into my pool here. I'm at lineup 1,300 out of 2,800 or so that are left. I actually still feel pretty good about this. So I now have a well-diversified pool of lineups where each lineup is expected to be duped 5 or less times from my initial pool of 5,000. So whether you're using SaberSim Standard or SaberSim Pro, again, most of what my process is designed to do here is build lineups that are optimals for single race sims, which the simulations themselves handle a lot of here, and then focus my efforts on making my lineups diversified and have a low probability of being duplicated or heavily duplicated in my contest. So if this was my final set of lineups that I was going to take with me into the contest, the last step here is to just fill these and upload to DraftKings. So I'll use SaberSim's entry editor to do that. So I'm just going to click fill entries and grab my file from DK here. We'll get my 20 entries for the Millie Maker loaded up here, and I'm going to just fill those. And then down here, click download and open DraftKings to download that new entries file and get that uploaded straight to DK. So I hope this was a helpful video for you guys out there. If you have any questions for me, feel free to reach out at support@sabersim.com or just post in the SaberSim Discord. I hope you all enjoy the Daytona 500 tomorrow and the rest of the NASCAR DFS season. And in the meantime, thank you all for watching and good luck.